Damian Chávez, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going well. So I don't normally like to date the podcasts, but on today of all days, and I actually didn't realize this when we had scheduled it, and it's worth mentioning, so I have to bring it up. Today is January 20th, the day that the 47th president, Donald Trump, has regained the office, I guess.
Yeah,
That might be
yeah,
one way of saying
yeah.
it. Ascended
Ascended to the
to the
office the
presidency.
second time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. To the praise of some and the bemoaning of others. But one of the things that's happened with him becoming president again is what's he going to do? What's he going to get rid of specifically? And there was recently the ban on TikTok, which was at least at the time of this recording banned and then reinstated. Who knows how long that will last? And on X, so the social media platform, there has been a push from theocratic, let's say right wing to far right characters wanting to get rid of things like pornography, as an example. And there is this argument that's put forward where pornography is degrading. It's a bad thing that we shouldn't have access to. There should be a government oversight on the what would you say, the creation and then the monetization of this. And then on the liberal to libertarian side of the argument, there's something like, well, it's a form of free expression. This is a legitimate form of art. There are scripts, there's lighting, there is technique that goes into this. This is a form of artistic expression, and the government shouldn't have anything to say about this. And within this, there is a question, and the question I pose to you, is pornography art?
Is it art or should it be banned, like you were saying? Like, those are two different.
You can take it in either order, but let's start with the
art part.
Let's start with the is pornography art?
I would say that it has elements that are connected with. Obviously, there's a spectrum, and so I before I delineated it, I separated or categorized that there are erotic themes that have to be or can be and are and have and should be expressed through art. There are erotic themes, but erotica is the category of that happy middle that is art, but explicitly erotic. It's erotic art, right? Erotica is usually what it's called. Porn is like so far removed from the artistic element that it becomes a use of media in terms of film or photography or whatever that is no longer connected to the artistic or creative side. It's fully removed from that for to be sort of, classed as not having cultural value or creative value, right? So like the furthest extreme. I mean, in other words, like just because somebody has a camera or just because somebody has a video camera, just because they record something and produce an image, not every image is art, basically, which goes against a lot of postmodern ideas about art.
Can you talk a little bit more about erotica? What exactly is erotica, and then what separates it from something like porn?
Erotica usually has like, I mean, I could, it's funny to talk about this without having examples, but like erotica has explicitly sexual themes and romantic themes that may or may not explicitly depict genitalia or lovemaking, but it always has a poetic or dreamlike aspect to it that removes it from the gritty realism of straight pornography. There's still, a lot of times it's painting. Like shunga is a good example, like Japanese shunga painting. There's always an awareness that the image is still taking place within the sort of the world of art. It's still happening within a frame. Its framing device is art. The creative aspect is still there, even if it's explicit. So it never fully launches into the porn that anybody can produce, I guess, with a camera or something like that. Um, Gosh, if I think about it more, I mean, there's probably a lot more to it than that, but that's just sort of like the quick read. Um,
Sure. So let's say I have a camera. I have a lighting setup. I write sometimes. I put together a script. I have the lighting. I have the camera. Maybe I even hire a cinematographer, and I put together this 30-minute quasi love story, quasi love making scene. Let's say like a short film, and there's no genitalia shown, but all the other elements are there. So you see the people, you get shots of the back, and I don't have an example I can pull up in mind. Or actually, that's not true. Something like I guess Game of Thrones would be a bad example. Maybe something like The Godfather, when Michael is with Apollonia, and there's some explicit elements shown, but it's not the sexual aspect is hinted at, but it's not explicitly shown. Would this fall more into the erotica side than the pornographic
yeah,
side?
because even at like if you dialed it down and dialed it down, that artistic element will remain as you think of it like a spectrum. As you further and further remove it from anything explicit, you could even get by with almost not even showing a kiss necessarily from the front. The further you remove from the physical aspects, explicit aspects, because even softcore porn doesn't show, for example, penetration, but it might show nipples or bare chests. It might show kissing. The genitalia thing seems to be the like boundary. How they used to do ratings back, like especially back in the 90s and in the 80s, like male genitalia was seen as the line that was drawn, whereas female genitalia wasn't. That's how they did it back then. I don't know how they come up with that, but um, if you further and further remove it, so if you slide it over to, there's nothing explicit, there's no kissing shown, but we still know it's an erotic, or it's a romantic scene or setting, then that creative element is going to remain consistent. So it seems to be that as you increase, you get to a point of diminishment of the surreal or creative aspect of it. That's the thing about pornography. It doesn't have the sense that it's a dream or that it's a poem or that has any narrative value at all. There's no narrative value in the most extreme porn. It's gonzo or whatever. Like it's strictly void of any narrative value at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so then taking this idea for a moment, let's say Christopher Nolan, he's doing the Odyssey coming out in a year or two, decides to have an explicit sexual scene between two characters, even going as far as to show penetration. But it's a Nolan film, so it's going to be framed well. It will have that artistic sort of dreamlike sequence, and even though there is, let's say in this case, penetration, it's going to have that Nolan-esque feel to it. So it will still feel almost otherworldly.
Right.
Is that classified as porn or is that erotic?
That's a difficult one because no one's ever really attempted anything like that. But if it if there was a little bit of penetration, but it wasn't the entire act, doesn't need to be shown because it's not critical for the narrative. In other words, if there was a little bit of penetration shown, and then it immediately cuts to the next scene, and if the violence actually was treated in the same regard. In other words, if because Homer depicts like spears going through people's heads and blood gushing out and all this. If you showed the violence with the same amount of realism, you showed the sex with it, then I think it would just have that like dramatic aspect to it, even showing the penetration. But if it's an extended, how do we say, fascination or preoccupation with the penetration, it is no longer critical for the narrative. So therefore, that would be porn. It would be sort of like this porn interlude in an otherwise artistic film. Because if you edit it out, it wouldn't take away from the story. You took out like the whole lovemaking scene, you just kind of cut that out. It wouldn't take it away. So that's why I would say, in that case, it is sort of like borderline. I mean, the film as a whole, I would say it's an editing issue. Yeah. It's an editing issue. I would say like you're putting porn in a regular movie. It's like take the porn out and you still got the movie, basically. But I'm saying that a little bit
The
of penetration could be shown. I'm saying a little bit could be shown, and then immediately the next part of the story that's more relevant. You know, like if there was just like a clip of that, it still wouldn't be porn, even though it's showing penetration. It's it's such a small element that it doesn't take over the whole film. So that's my personal take.
Sure. In that scene, would that be considered artistic, or would the film be artistic with an element of something that wasn't artistic?
It would be
In this
it
case,
would be
a pornographic
erotic.
scene.
It would be an erotica within an otherwise artistic film. It's still erotica, but I would say that something like that. And the thing about erotica, and it gets more to this the politics, is that it is not for children. Like there has to be compartmentalization of these things. So that's what ratings are for and stuff like that. So I would say go ahead and make the film, but just it is not for public consumption, a mass, public at large, not a family film, you know, either way. So even if it is, even if artists can produce it, it doesn't mean that children are your audience, basically. So, or any other, I don't know, susceptible individuals or what, immature adults. I don't know, whatever. Like there's certain people that don't need to see these things. And then for mature adults, it's like, it's fine, um, just like how they used to do it.
When it comes to
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
yeah, when it comes to your own artwork, a lot of it focuses on nudity, Art Deco, and nudity. How do you know if what you're producing is an appreciation, let's say, of the human body versus something that is meant to be erotic or titillating or arousing in a sense?
How do I know that it's one or the other, or what do you?
Yeah. How do you know that what you're producing isn't something that could be labeled as pornographic?
Well, I mean, people can label it all kinds of things, but I already know what I'm putting into it. I know what my instinct for it is. I know what my impulse is, and I'm also aware of what happens with, especially with like, how do I say this? It's like there's an appropriate behavior, for example, like if you're dealing with a nude model, where there are boundaries, even though there's a trusting relationship. And so just because somebody's nude as a model, you don't necessarily confuse that with other other instances of nudity. So I can distinguish, right, in my own private life, I can distinguish that feeling or that impulse, the creative, from my own, I don't know, my own love life, I guess. So I can clearly distinguish those things. So because I don't go into it with, I guess you might say like anything other than the creative, right? I can distinguish. So I already know my intentions are clear. I'm pure in what I'm doing. So I know, like, personally, that I'm not bringing that element into it. I might borderline a little bit with the erotic, but there's a lot of room there, I guess, between that and pornographic. Like I'll defend that, you know what I'm saying? Like in terms of my work, like it's clearly art. There's clearly a suspension of belief. There is a surreal world in which that is taking place. It's not, just somebody's bedroom or something. It's not, that type of world. So I feel like if anybody approaches my work with any depth and seriousness, they'll see, okay, yeah, clearly this is not porn. Yes, it may occasionally lean to the erotic, but it's not porn. So it's like a separate area, and yet I'm not even like labeling myself as like some kind of erotica artist, because there are artists that do that. They explicitly make erotic art all the time. Whereas I'm just like doing art. It's just that I'm veering a little bit closer to the erotica side sometimes, occasionally, but not necessarily full fledged. It's kind of borderline. It's kind of yeah.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, there is a lot of art, especially in ancient Greek art. There's statues that depict nudity, but it is more of it's a celebration of the human form. You don't get a sense that this is supposed to be sensual or
Absolutely.
erotic.
Yeah.
It's a celebration of the human.
Exactly. And that's really the thing about a classical art in general. It does that. I mean, there's a dignity involved in that. The classical sort of plays with that. Um, it can be heroic, right? But there's also other instances that could be a little more tranquil, repose or idyllic. And I'm a lot of my stuff, especially with the female figures, it lends towards that side. There's a healing aspect or harmony, or there's equilibrium, that kind of thing is what I'm sort of aiming for with the other work.
In putting a feminist cap on for a moment, quasi-feminist cap on, one could say that in doing porn, that there is everything that you were talking about. There is the celebration of the human body, that there is harmony, that this is empowering and a representation of female freedom and a celebration of femininity. Why is that no different than a classical Greek understanding of nudity in the human body?
I mean, that's such a loaded thing. That's worth like 3 podcasts, right? That's like a whole other thing. Well, I mean, I think in the practical, or using the examples of the non-narrative explicit porn, I mean, because I'm aware of the differences, like they're clearly distinct. There is an indignity, right? Like there's there probably is I've seen examples, like there are examples of explicit porn that will even have like some remnants or something that make it less indignant than others. But I would say that the mass consumption of it, just the day-to-day, the standard stuff, is degrading. It's degrading to the human form in a lot of ways. There's a lot of, how do we say this? The way that things are shot, or the power relationships that are occurring. So there's a lot of stuff in there that the Greeks would prefer erotica. I mean, you could see it with the pottery. Romans did this. You can clearly see this with the visual depictions, like at Pompeii and stuff like that. So what was I saying? That a lot of it is anti-classical, I guess is another way to put it. Is I'm saying that actual porn is very frequently ill-dignified when it comes to the elements that classical humanists want to bring out in terms of showing nudity. There's differences there. The way that the human body is actually depicted. So there's like, I don't know, the way things are shot, the way things are framed. Because if they did show it with dignity, again, it would start moving back towards the erotica as opposed to the porn. That's the thing about erotica, is it like a lot of times it's explicitly romantic and sensual. It is stimulating, it is titillating, but not in the same way as explicit pornography.
Can you say more on that? Because
of that artistic or creative element. A lot of times erotica could be like even showing genitalia, but it'll do it with black and white photography. It'll make things blurry, where you're getting an impression of things. There's a sense of intimacy a lot of times in erotic art. I mean, it's funny to talk about this without examples, but yeah, there's definitely something else happening that keeps you in check, in that the sense of poetry, right? The sense of suspension of belief, that what you're looking at is not an instance in time, the way that we look at film, right? Versus like a newsreel, for example, a news video, as opposed to an artistic film. The artistic film is taking place in a poetic narrative, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and end. But security camera footage, things that the news uses, there are instances of time. They're documentary, and a lot of times, porn is like that, where it's a bit like war footage or something where you can't use it for maybe not war footage, or crime footage. It's not really like because it doesn't have the narrative properties to it. So poetry or poetic or erotica, you can sort of return to. You know, there's other aspects to it, but I'm just that's just like, you know, just pulling out of thin air. But yeah, I think we know it. I think we know it when we see it, when we have examples and we say, this is clearly porn. This is erotica here, and then this is sort of classical nudity. You know, there's always a sense of divinity with classical nudity. There's a sense of human dignity, harmony, proportion, health. There's a lot more stuff that goes into classical nudity, depictions of nudity. You know.
What do you mean when you say divinity?
Well, even if a person is sort of agnostic or atheist or something like that, just the idea of the design, the fine tuning of the human design, of the power. I mean, look at an athlete, for example. I mean, that's very much like a classical. You know, it's like the body in proportion, right? In physical proportion, the health, the vitality, the power, the skill. There's something you know, wonderful about that. There's something magnificent that causes us to you know, to be in awe of that as a beautiful thing. But it's not sentimental, you know. It's not that type of beauty. Yeah.
Where does smut fall into all of this?
Oh, smut.
Or what is smut, actually, for people who don't know?
That's the same as the hardcore pornography, basically. Man, these are getting hot. Woof. My ears are burning now. Gotta cool them off. Yeah, smut is the same as the hardcore pornography, but usually it meant like magazines, things like that, like back in the day. So, yeah, that's what I.
Would that
that's
be
the word
like
I use.
Playboy or
What happened? No, not Playboy.
would that be
not
like Playboy as a magazine?
Not Playboy. It would be like, maybe Hustler and like things further extreme to that. Just where it's like there's no, you know, it's just a very explicit. It's very, you know, clear, and it does show penetration. Sometimes it doesn't have to. Sometimes it's just crass nudity, basically. The lighting is bad, you know. It's just like I said, the artistic elements are removed from it. They're badly designed. There's not much appealing. There's not much appealing there from like an artistic point of view. You know what I mean? There's no thought about like the background or, you know, anything like that. So yeah, smut's a good one. Because smut is like a separate category, right? It's just like, that's smut. It's XXX. It's, you know, because when you use pornography, it's going back to the question, like, well, what is or what isn't? But when you say smut, it's already the stuff that's categorized. Boom. Say, oh, smut, erotica, and then art. You know, it's like three separate things.
I do want to ask some more, or explore this concept of nudity and classical nudity and the approach to it. But before we get to that, I don't want to leave this question on the table.
Mm-hmm.
If porn is as bad as you're making it out to be, should it be banned? If there's nothing good about it, if it's not artistic, if it's just degraded,
Well, I mean, there's a lot about bad to it, right? There's probably, like I said, there's probably a sliver of porn that's probably only to be enjoyed by mature adults. If we want to protect, I don't think it's about free speech, really. I think it's just this separate thing that, okay, adults are engaging in it. Nobody's really getting hurt. It's maybe, you know, fun for everybody involved, including the consumer. But just because it's protected under the First Amendment, just because of all these things, it's the access part that I think people have problem with. So back in the day, you know, I remember as a kid, like, you go to the video store, right? VHS, you go to Blockbuster or whatever, and not Blockbuster, they didn't have any, but like the mom and pop video store, you'd go and you have the little, you know, section that says adults only and it's XXX, and nobody goes back there. If you're under 18, if you're a kid, you might peek or something, you know, but you're not going back there. Somebody's going to grab you by your collar and yank you out. You're not going to be able to rent that tape. So, of course, it happened, but in general, it was regulated. So the digital equivalent of that is for me personally, I don't understand why kids are using the internet, period, at all. Like at all. I don't understand giving a mobile to a child. I just don't get it. I just don't think kids should be using the internet, period. But that's my personal take. But so I think the legal part is that probably a great bunch of porn should be banned just outright, but there may be a narrow space, domestically produced. Maybe there's certain guidelines that it has to follow or whatever, but I think that there is a certain element that we could say it's not erotica, it's not art, it is porn, it is this separate thing. It may be okay to just have that one thing with no legal access for children, no, impose really strong fines if this is, being given to kids or, that kind of thing. It could be regulated, but it's going to occupy a very small space.
I want to go back to this idea, or rather this practice of painting or drawing models that are nude in a studio.
Yeah.
Now, for me, that sounds like a very awkward situation. Yeah. That's probably some of my own immaturity.
Right.
But there is an element of, oh my gosh, there's just a naked person standing in front of me, right, and I'm drawing. That seems foreign. I know it's a practice in art. I know it's been around for a long time, but there is an element of that for me personally just seems a little bit awkward and a little bit strange. Yeah. What is the right approach to a situation like that in a studio? Like, how do we transform that situation into where it's an artistic experience?
Like you're saying, like you as a student, like you're approaching that as a student, like you're in a life class, like a life drawing class. I think there has to be lectures. There has to be discussions between the master or the teacher and the students. And there has to be a lot of exposure, obviously, to historical works. There has to be a kind of reducing of the anxiety or reducing of that awkwardness to tell people that you're entering into almost like a sacred, dignified. It's an okay thing to happen. Everyone's an adult. We're trying to learn the human body. I mean, it's the same thing that's going to happen with a doctor, with medical. The doctors are not going to be giggling and, like, they have to, that's okay. That feeling is going to be there, but it will go away. It's kind of like anxiety or fear or something when you're trying to maybe be, do like, guest speaking or something like that. Like that's going to be there. That fear or that embarrassment, that's our child self state kind of coming up. It's okay. And it's there to protect us, right? It comes up and it's there to protect us. It's like if we were 7 or if we were 10 or whatever, being exposed to these things, but it does fade. It does fade. It goes away. And what happens is it's kind of like the awe, the amazement as a designer, as an artist to say, wow, here is this wonderful thing that nature has produced, that God has created or whatever, that every part fits well with every other part. There's all this thought and consideration. So the beauty of it, the dignity of it takes over that. So I don't think it's anything to worry about. I would say, it'll eventually fade. It'll transform. But it's okay to have that in the beginning. I think I probably even had it like the first day of, life drawing when I was like 15, probably 15 years old. I think I had that. I became self-conscious a little bit. But the models start to like not care, right? They're up there. And it just goes away. And then it becomes really fun and interesting. But there's still boundaries. Like the model, when they're taking their breaks, they'll wear the robe, or you don't approach them in the same way. Like there's an etiquette for the studio. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the etiquette of a situation like that? Like, what are the rules? What are the boundaries? You described it as a ritual.
Yeah, they're in a class or in a workshop type of thing. Well, number one is no one who's allowed, or no one who's not a student is not allowed in the class. So you can't have like looky-loos coming in. You can't, because that does happen. Like there'll be people in another class or another, hey, what are you guys doing in there? What's happening? You know, they think it's like a peep show or something. It's like, no, if you're not a student, you're not serious, you get out of there, because the model is vulnerable psychologically and physically. They're vulnerable. So there is a kind of trust relationship that has to build up. So no outsiders. And then there's like, make sure that the model is not too cold, not too hot. So you have little heaters. If it's, they have to take breaks. They have to have their 30 minutes and sessions and stuff like that. We come back to the pose, and that's like a legal thing too. No touching of the model unless you know the model, right? Unless you are personally friends with them. You can't just go up to them and touch them. There's a lot of stuff. You want to maintain a certain distance. Yeah, it's just a lot of things. I mean, what else? The model sometimes will give preference to like music sometimes, because you have to play music while you're working, and sometimes it's like, they're sort of stationary, so they're picking up things a lot more. Their senses are becoming like, you know what I mean? Like they're more sensitive. Whereas my focus might be the drawing, right? The students are sort of, their focus, is there, and they might not really hear the music as much. It might not be such a big deal. So the model can say, like, what is that? Stop it. There's a lot of things. The harsh lighting, no talking about the model's body. Obviously, you're not discussing a side of beef, right? So there's a lot of little things that have to be regulated or monitored, like in that environment, in a class, for example. So.
What is it that you as a student learn in a situation like that, other than just the continued development of your craft? Like, why is it different to work with a live model than, let's say, a little stick figure that you can adjust the limbs on?
Yeah, that's a good one. Oh man, there's so much that happens. And this is where you get into like the kind of almost like Five Rings kind of stuff, Musashi, the samurai guy that talks about the art, the sword, the art of the. It's like,
I don't know him.
Yeah, the Book of Five Rings. It's like the master samurai basically talking about the art of swordsmanship, and how, there's kind of like the thing itself. He talks about the thing itself, that the tool in a way possesses the art within itself. It's like the spirit of the sword, the spirit of this, the spirit of that. In a way, there's a lot of learning that happens working from life that cannot be explained in the book. You can't make a YouTube video out of it. It can only be learned by doing it. But I'm sure there's somebody studying, creativity and drawing and things like that, but that could maybe explain some of it. A lot of it has to do with like gesture, for example, gesture drawing. Because it's a human to human thing, there is something being picked up that you will not get from studying lay figures, or écorchés, or studying dummies or computer aided design. There is something that is missing when you don't work from life. But the working from life is a step or a stage. So I'm not one of those purists that says, oh, you can only work from life, right? You can never work from photos or whatever. No, but I would say that it's an essential stage that our true classical humanist type artists, figurative artists, should be required to study. Like, I think it's imperative that life study happens, but I also think cast studies and master copy, all those other things have to be in there to really be well-rounded in the craft. Because there is something that is gained from life study that cannot be, there's no substitute for it. So the gesture part is a big part of it. Gesture is the energy moving through, right? The energy moving through the pose. The selective curves that describe that energy. So the vitality of the pose, basically, is something that is picked up better from life drawing. It's more efficient, actually, because the model can change every 30 seconds or every minute. And when the model changes the pose, it's a whole new composition, basically. So if you're training your memory, right, your short-term memory or your sensitivity to gesture, this happens best with the models doing it, right? The model is switching to, like if you set the timer and you say 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, like that, increments, or 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, and you have to sort of catch the entire figure, like from head to toe. The underlying energy of the pose is best learned from life. And that assessment of the whole pose, that instantaneous, what you're doing is you're training to get ahead of your analytical mind. You're like picking up visually. It's stretching your visual muscles, your spatial thinking. It's actually stretching it. It's flexing it, basically, exercising it by doing that from life. And you can't do it in digitally. It's not the same thing. You have to perceive the object in 3 dimensions. Not a flat screen, it won't work. Because sometimes what you're getting is like the pose moving from front to back, not just silhouette, but the depth of the figure too. And so that's one example is gesture. But I'm sure there's other things too.
How much does that play into your work when drawing nude figures? Do you recall this training and then that applies to what it is that you're doing?
Oh, all of those things are like muscles, right? It's cross training. So gesture drawing is like gestural understanding, let's say. We want to call it like that. Gestural, that's one thing. There's analytical drawing or sight-size drawing or structural drawing. These are kind of related. They're all kind of compressed together. Those things are an entirely different mental mode. It's still visual and spatial, but it's a separate mode. So those have to be strengthened by different exercises. And when you have all of that together, it's intuitive when I'm working, right? When anybody when anybody has a certain level of skill, they're going to do that. They're going to pull from those different cross trainings. It's just that you can see it in a lot of people's work that they may have good analytical skills, but their gesture is weak. And that seems to be a big problem with like the current atelier methods that seem to be fairly popular right now, is they're sort of weak. There's weaknesses that are kind of obvious to anybody that's, really studies figurative art. Like you'll see like, the poses are kind of static and things like that. It doesn't mean they always have to be moving, because even a standing figure has gesture. Even a motionless figure does. There is a vitality that's moving through a living form, a living body that, again, you can only pick that up from studying from life. There's actually, even a figure that's standing still is still emitting, there's still, blood coursing through, you know what I mean? There's still something there that is hard to describe, versus a really static figure, like a lay figure or a mannequin or something.
And you can see the difference in art?
Yeah, I could tell.
Whether somebody is aware of this or not?
Yeah, because I've so many years and so much practice just with the figure, right? Just with the figure and drawing that I can pick up really subtle differences and say, because we do it all the time when we critique ourselves and our students, that, okay, this person needs to strengthen their gesture, the concept of gesture. This person needs to really get down their proportions. Their design sense is not quite there. The relationship of the parts to each other, the silhouette, right? There's different things that you can see. Other people, their focus is like, value is their focus, or, the contour or whatever. Like, and of course, different artists naturally, they have like their own predisposition, right? Our own bias, our own temperament. So some artists are more value. They perceive and value more. That's important to them. The relative light and dark distribution, right? There's other people that are like me, like more silhouette, more proportion. My focus is more about proportion. The design is more important to me. I pick that up right away. I'm sensitive to it. The shape itself, right? Other people are really color, like their focus is color and the color harmony. So everyone has like a different natural bent. It's God-given, right? They have a natural bent, but they still need to develop the other sides that they're maybe not as interested in, because it helps bolster even their focus. The ideal would be to be, perfectly well-rounded, but everyone's always going to tip to one side or the other.
In your worldview, why is it beyond the sexual that do you think that people are so fascinated with the human body? It seems to be a form of art that is depicted cross-culturally all around the world. Everyone has a fascination with it. And beyond the sexual, I mean,
Yeah.
there's just a genuine fascination with our bodies. Why do you think that is?
We inhabit bodies. We have bodies, and we relate to other bodies, right? We our beloved loved ones, our friends, or everyone we're interacting with, and it's also like the memory of those who have passed. It's the way we embody like our highest values. They become sort of like you have the Statue of Liberty, you have Lady Justice, you have like this embodiment, this thing that communicates to us. We have mascots, they have. So there's a lot of, the fascination is, I think, because we are more attuned to that, right? Our senses, our sensibilities are more attuned to that, inhabiting bodies. And, in a way, it's like, it is spiritual, even though it's corporeal, it's still spiritual. And there's an everlastingness that when we put it into art, we somehow immortalize the body, right? Even though it passes, we immortalize it. So there's a lot of, it's just so much there that, and the thing about it too is like, I think even lay people are acutely aware of the changes in proportions. They may not know what proportion is, but they're acutely aware when the human being is deformed or when a human being is good looking. There's something innate. We're innately drawn to beauty. We innately understand that something isn't right, or somebody is really well proportioned, symmetrical. There's a correspondence to that we all delight in. Even men looking at men. Even it doesn't have to be gay or weird or whatever. We can still appreciate fitness. You see this a lot, especially with like athletes. The heroic nudity is part of that we sense that there's power also. And that's admirable. It's beautiful. And that's different. It's beauty, and it's in a different aspect than to say like feminine beauty, right? Maybe that's something different. Maybe that's not martial power. Maybe it's harmony. Maybe it's fertility. Maybe it's sensuality. Maybe it's other things that are other attributes, but there's still the internal coherence. And I think that's the underlying thing that is kind of like health. It's an illustration of health. So there's obviously a mental aspect to that, like a sound mind and a sound body that comes with it, which is kind of why like we depict evil characters a lot of times as having bodily problems, bodily attributes that are like exaggerated, right? Evil characters that are hunched over, or they're monsters, right? They're ugly, their skin is messed up, their proportions are kind of, that's what we do naturally, right? We picture vampires, not vampires, but like, elves, or not elves, like ghouls, this kind of thing of through history, the monster has an element of ugliness to it, like a chimera or something, right? There's an element of things being smashed together, juxtaposed. Like the chimera is like, it's a lion, but it's part snake, but it's part this, but it's part that, right? It's like this terrible monster that's composite of all these different things that don't go together. So it's kind of like that, where we see somebody that maybe, somebody's born with like an extra limb or something. We go, there's something wrong with that. There's something out of place. So
Is this idea a merely Western idea? Because Damian, I have learned through social media that fat is actually beautiful. And there are some cultures that depicts large, obese people in their paintings. They consider fat people beautiful, and skinny is the fat.
I'm definitely Western biased, and I don't really make any like excuse for, I'm not going to like justify that, but I think that I personally, I'm going to make that conscious decision. I'm going to say, yes, this is an exclusively Western classical humanist tradition. But if somebody else's culture, whatever, like I see a lot of good Japanese stuff that lines up with that, maybe some Indian, maybe some, other things. I'm like, that's great. We have different there's different classicisms, right? There definitely is different classicism. There's Japanese, there's Chinese, there's Indian. There are classical cultures that are non-Western, but for our purposes, I would say, well, that's great, fine. You guys can do all that. And, if you want to paint obese people, if that's your culture, like, that's great. But I'm speaking to my work, my focus, everything is mostly towards a Western audience. So if non-Western people want to enjoy that, great. That's fantastic. Like, I've shipped paintings to other countries. I've shipped paintings to the Philippines. I've shipped them to China. Like, that's great. And they enjoy it. Okay, fine. Even like some, I think I sent something to like Dubai or something, it was like, that was unusual. But my focus, like, yeah, I'm only concerned with like the Western tradition and stuff like that. So, and in our tradition, it's definitely a Greco-Roman, basis. And then it has all of these different instances throughout Europe, throughout the rest, everybody knows the rest of the story. So it's kind of like, that's what's important to me. Like, the other stuff, I do love Asian art. I do love other things, but I'm not going to put them in the same. I'm not going to have them tell me, like, oh no, your standards are screwed. Like, these standards are better. None of that stuff. And I think I think people need a little bit of chauvinism. I think you have to, especially in the milieu of modern and postmodern art. So there has to be an assertion of the classical Western tradition. Like, that has to be asserted. I think our survival actually requires it. Yeah.
Say more on that.
Oh, that's a whole other.
What do you mean our survival?
That's a whole other, like, 2 podcasts right there. Well, it's one way to look at it is like postmodern art and theory is essentially, if you were to say, well, what's the side effect of all of this, right? There were promises made. There was like, oh, we're supposed to be doing this and this, to bring attention to what's marginalized, blah, blah. At the end of the day, the practical effect is its aim is demoralizing the West. So for that reason alone, it should be opposed. And especially because a lot of people don't make the connection. They don't see that, like, you're alienating the collector or elite, let's say, because it's mostly, everyone kind of sits back and goes, well, the only people that would, care about these, because there's always a price tag there, right? There's a thing with establishment work, establishment art. So establishment art, and the production of that, that's like you're cultivating a world, a view of society and of humanity and of the West. You're cultivating something that is now training our elites, or our wealthy class, collector class, etc., educated classes. We're training them and demoralizing them in a different way than we're demoralizing, the truck driver or the plumber. And it's a different kind of demoralizing, and it is aimed to disfigure humanity. It is, because we went into that thing before about the beauty of the body, the beauty of beauty, of harmony, of all these things. We're being shown, inundated with like the exact opposite of that, right? So there's deliberate ugliness that's created through postmodern art, and it's literally the intention. The net effect of that is you're going to have leaders, for example, who are like disassociated. They create it's like a disassociation between them and the society in which they have power and influence. So a lot of problems, people sort of sitting around going, well, I don't know what to do, or, well, that's not my problem. A lot of these things are related to this campaign that's like, 80 years old, essentially. Rather than edifying and training those people by, there's a lot of things in classical art, like maybe biblical scenes, maybe classical scenes of the idea of sacrifice, of proper leadership, civic values, civic virtues, stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could be shown to society, right? Reflecting back, the West reflecting back to itself, its own best intentions, its own higher values, all of these things. But you have a whole bunch of people who are at the top who are collecting this stuff. There's a lot of money to be made, but the messaging, right? That's the thing. The messaging is anti-Western. It's antisocial. A lot of it is sociopathic, perverse. I mean, it's it's pornography is like, we were talking about the pornography. That's just like one little tiny percentage. I mean, there's all of this other stuff. And I believe that a lot of it can be indistinguishable from psychological warfare. A lot of it functions like that. And that's what I said about demoralization. That's actually what it's designed to do. And I think that the elimination of standards of, eliminating beauty, but also eliminating skill leads you to then, you have to be naive, I guess, to not see that would be exploited by bad actors. And I think that that's what we have in a lot of cases with postmodern art, is that we have people who have impulses to be weird for weirdness sake and to be destructive and anti-Western, and they found an outlet because there's already a vehicle there to receive it. The system, I would say, the education system, the gallery system, the funding system, all of that is already in place to pull towards itself. The same way that, like, the pornography, right? There's predatory people in pornography, obviously. So they're going to pull, it's going to pull more bad actors, organized crime, all these other things are going to be pulled into it. Well, there's a lot of organized shenanigans, let's say, that are drawn to postmodern art precisely because of the relativism that it pretends to, to be a sort of underlying operating credo or whatever. It's relativism. Like, you can't make value judgments. You can't say that one thing is better than the other. You can't have the above and the, because there's this pretense to egalitarianism, to, I don't know, creative freedom. There's all of these things that it hides behind. But the idea that it wouldn't be exploited by bad actors, I think, is naive. And I think that that's run its course. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying about the demoralization. I think that's how it functions now. I mean, there's a lot of art that should frankly be pulled out of the museums and just, but, we're not talking about the tearing down of the statues, like the political stuff. It's not really that. It's more like, my question is, why is taxpayer money going towards these, like, large projects that are, anti-American or anti-Western? I would say, like, fine, you want to, hey, creative freedom, go ahead, do whatever you want, make whatever you want, but don't put it in a city museum. Don't put it in as anything that's in any way connected with the taxpayers, because the public at large hates that stuff, doesn't want it. So if you just defunded a whole bunch of it, just from the public aspect of it, a lot of that stuff wouldn't hold up anymore. It wouldn't have the prestige. It wouldn't have the, I don't know, acceptance, social acceptance. There's a lot of things that would be pulled out just by simply removing taxpayer money from that. Because what we're doing is we're funding our own creative destruction, but also the moral aspect of that we're also encouraging. We're inflicting, it's inflicted self-damage. It's suicidal in a way. Yeah.
Last question, Damian, and I ask this to all the guests. What is a positive vision for the future that specifically you, would like to manifest?
Well, lately they've been talking a lot about this sort of revival of Art Deco. They've been talking about, the idea of great again, right? Make America great again. You can't be great. I said this, I don't know, a couple of days ago. I was tweeting about this. You can't be great without having great art. It's impossible. No society can do that. So if we're building new things, or if we're fixing old things, architecture, for example, always had classical architecture. And in the last instance of that in America in the 20th century was during the 30s and 40s. That's sort of the end point. If we're going to rebuild and bring back dignity and all these kinds of, we have to have public art or sculpture, paintings, murals in these buildings, in these new buildings. We have to have them as part of the building, right? The external facade, the internal, we need fountains. We need great lobbies. We need to have really excellent public spaces, private spaces. And so we're training all these sculptors, we're training all these painters, but we need to bring all this stuff together. So I would like to see public commissions, just like they did it for modern art, just like they've been doing it for postmodern art. I want to see public commissions, in every major city, definitely in DC, that enlists the talents and the skills of great American artists that are like really ready to put a face to these buildings, right? To put figures into them, decorative treatments, good design. I want to see good design, just like we did in the 30s, just like, we could do it anytime, but I want to see that being marshaled by everybody, like the truck driver, the guy that, is a plumber, to all the way to captains of industry, political leaders. I want to see them like marshal that and say, we need that, because that, the side effects from that are like multitude, positive. So I want to see that. And then that art is enjoyed by everybody. Everybody likes good design. Everybody likes good figurative, work. But it can be, there's animal sculptures, I'm not saying, plain realism, but just quality stuff fused with public spaces and architecture and in interiors, environments and stuff like that. I think that would be a good, plus, of course, easel painting for private stuff too. But I'd like to see some change in the public space. I think that would be really cool.
That's a good vision. Damian Chávez, thanks as always. Appreciate your time.
All right, man. Thanks.